years now. Have any acquisitions of sites had to be cancelled or put on hold as a result of this crisis?
Yes. We've certainly put 4 to mind. I mean, they're smallish acquisitions at the moment, but 4 have had to be put on hold. And certainly we have a moratorium on acquisitions at the moment until we see what how this comes out. And we're particularly concerned about a second spike. Really, that's until we get to, I would say, Christmas, we'll not feel able to resume our sort of confidence around acquisition.
And do you think this is going to have a malignant effect on the country's cultural heritage?
Well, I've already been approached by a number of places who are now very worried that they are going to go to the wall. And interestingly, I've had a few saying, please don't let anybody think that you were going to scoop us up. And we wouldn't have the resources to be able to rescue any of those smaller privately owned heritage sites. We wouldn't have the capacity to take on anything more at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Giles, and thank you, Hilary McGrady, the Director General of the National Trust, for your evidence today.
Thank you.
We're now going to call our final witness in today's session. It's Ros Pritchard, OBE, the Director General of the British Holiday and Home Park Association. Good morning, Ros.
Good morning.
And thank you for being there, listening in for the entire session. It's really been very interesting. You'd probably been struck by the coastal tourism evidence, where they said about 7%, I believe, of seaside businesses have already gone to the wall. Yeah. What sort of number or percentage of your membership do you think are in the same position?
At the moment, they are hanging in there. They have received their business rates holidays. They have accessed grants, the small ones. It's the small ones we worry about. They are looking at moving forwards, and we think they will start going to the wall depending on when we get to open, possibly October. And our big worry, a lot of your witnesses today said they wanted support through until the end of the calendar year. We won't be getting money coming back in again until next Easter, and that's if there isn't a second wave. So a lot of our asks, sorry to cut to the chase, have been about specific assistance for seasonal tourism businesses who earn their money between March and October, who've lost the 2020 season effectively, and we are going to need help to get through to next spring. So I think the winter is when we will see business failures without that support.
Yeah. Well, you'll have 3 winters on the trot.
Yeah. 3 winters in a row.
Yeah. What is anything specifically that you need? We've had mentions of graduated reduction in furloughing, special sort of measures for the tourism sector. Is there anything you specifically want to highlight as an idea or a plan for how you get through this?
So, for example, I have to caveat everything. We are very grateful for everything that government has done. But the furlough scheme is for the whole economy. It isn't geared to tourism. Our small park businesses couldn't furlough their maintenance engineers because they couldn't be without their skills for 3 weeks at a stretch. A holiday park, whether it's a big one or a small one, is a complex business. We have the infrastructure of a small village. So we need the guy that can sort the electric or the lady that can sort the sewage works on the park. So we haven't been able to furlough our staff, which means our costs have been ongoing. Another thing would be looking at the loan system. If you look at the loan system in France, the bounce back loans are great, but they're only 50k. In France, they have a bounce back system up to 1/3 of your turnover with the same simplicity that we have for bounce back loans. They're absolute godsend, but 50k isn't going to be enough to see the businesses through until next spring. I could go on at length if you want me to.
No, I prefer not length, but if you want to say anything, please do.
Okay. Another example from France, which I thought was just so clever. A lot of the ongoing costs at the moment are meeting the interest payments on loans and finance. The French have given their tourism businesses a 6-month holiday, and they've added 6 months onto the end of the loan period. So they're giving them breathing space. Or if you look at the British system, it's absolutely wonderful that they've deferred our VAT payments, but they've deferred them through till March next year. When will cash be at the absolute lowest for a seasonal business? March next year. So that's why we're asking that, we've written to the Prime Minister, we are asking that they look specifically at the seasonality of tourism businesses and what that seasonality means to business needs. As long as furloughing is across, we were begging for flexible furloughs. They've brought it in from August, but that means we've got all our costs right through till August, and we don't know yet what the Chancellor means about sharing the cost from then. So we really do need tourism to have a special place. You've heard this morning how first hit, hardest hit, etc., etc. But with our seasonality, our 3 winters, we need a specific programme for seasonal tourism businesses. And that's exactly what they've done in France. President Macron actually met with my opposite number in France, with the other tourism industries, and told them what they were going to do. I'll echo everything we've heard this morning. Nigel Huddleston is the most wonderful tourism minister. He knows our sector really, really well, but he isn't the head of state.
Okay, yeah, so, and neither's the Prime Minister, by the way.
Don't accept the Prime Minister. It doesn't need to be the Queen, but we just need that recognition.
You want to be the Queen? That's fine. That's fine. Isn't the case that there is a danger with partial opening, that a lot of your members make money from bars and restaurants and other tertiary activity, and if you are sort of only partially open, that itself means a challenge, because you'll have staff, but you won't have the income coming in. Is that something you're thinking about?
That we're thinking about it, but it's manageable. I mean, obviously, our bars and clubs and cafes are closed the way every other pub and restaurant is across the land. But that is furloughable, because you can shut the door and lock the gate and walk away. You can lock the door. Whereas the park, the ongoing costs of all that land to manage, etc., is continuing, which is why we've asked for very early consideration to be given for example, our caravan holiday home owners who own their own holiday home, for whom social distancing would be identical to what they do at home, and for justification as to why they should be waiting for the pubs and clubs in July for reopening. Because we've got a lot of unhappy caravan owners. Those holiday caravans, there's about 250,000 of them across the land. That's their happy place. The virus means they can't get to their holiday caravans. They're unhappy, we're unhappy. So if we could get them back and start getting local communities used to having tourists, because there is an issue with local communities, they're understandably worried, that would help all round.
Yeah, actually, just before I move over to Clive to ask you a question, it's interesting you said about local communities and their nervousness. There's been a lot of messaging that's gone on from councillors and members in Parliament and also the government of stay away. Understandably so, it was lockdown rules, etc. But as we move out of that, is there any chance to which that sort of messaging has had a potentially more long-term effect, could make people nervous and perhaps make people feel as if they're not that welcome?
We've had vigilantes. One, we've got holiday parks, say, with NHS workers, because we've been accommodating key workers when we could. We've had vigilantes checking up and reporting them to the council and the police. Who are these people on your holiday park? What are they doing there? That negative anti-feeling is going to be an issue. At the same time, there was something very, very similar after Foot and Mouth. People didn't want tourists in the countryside because we had to protect the farmers, but it settled down within a fortnight. A lot of the evidence we've had today has been based on the idea that we don't get a second wave. Foot and Mouth didn't come back again. If we get a second wave, we're looking at a completely different scenario. If we don't get a second wave, things settle down, people will get used to having their tourists back. And if they don't have them back, they won't have the village shop and they won't have the garage, the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, because it's the tourists that are sustaining all those local businesses when you've got a tiny local community who's unable to do so. It's all part of we're integrated into our rural and coastal communities. So we're hoping that will be seen, but there is a very real challenge there at the moment.
Yeah, I'm just very stark about the idea of vigilantes. I mean, how on earth do we switch from stay away to please come?
Well, I think it means that we need government leadership. If you look at Boris's announcement on the Sunday evening, relaxing, opening up the country, there's a pity about the wording, because when you're outside the M25, the word hospitality doesn't really mean holiday park. And of course, Boris said you could go and sit in your local park. So we had a week of park businesses closed by law having to turn their customers away. But again, an example, I got onto DCMS, the messaging was changed. Nigel Huddleston even put a tweet out for us that we all shared, and it had settled down. But yes, real challenges ahead.
Great. Clive Efford.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from that, is there guidance, detailed guidance that you would look to the government for that would enable you to sort of phase a reopening in certain circumstances, in certain situations within holiday parks?
if we're talking about the health and safety and social distancing guidance, we're actually working it up at the moment. I mentioned that for holiday caravan owners, it's simplicity itself. They have a key to their own door, just as they do at home. But we're also working with UK hospitality as a sector, because our reception is the same as a hotel reception. Our bar is the same as a pub. So we're working together across tourism, developing guidance to business on the health and safety requirements. And the idea is that goes, we get it all together, we get it up to DCMS, they get it up to Public Health England, and then it comes back down to the industry. But actually, it's quite a hard thing to draft because the science keeps changing. So we learned yesterday that we had to look out for a new symptom, for example. So we went back all the stuff we'd already written and put it all back in again. And that's been part of the challenge with this whole crisis, is the speed and the learning and the volume of information that small businesses are having to take on board, which is why we've been very busy for the last few weeks.
Sure you have. So you have what, 6,200 sites across the country, and many smaller independent caravan owners, etc. in amongst that. How do you communicate with that level of number of people and businesses?
Well, the industry is incredible because we've got a handful of big corporate groups who are about 30% of the pitches across the land, but 70% are all the SME, medium, small, and then a long, long tail of micro businesses. We organised the association's first ever webinar. We called it a virtual conference because otherwise people wouldn't have come. And I believe that I welcomed between 12 and 1,500 people into my home that morning to talk them through everything that we had put out. We gave them all Twitter lessons at the beginning of the crisis because we knew we were going to need to lobby. And we pushed out email. And then we have sector-specific advisors because we have to, the word we use is caravanize issues. We have to actually take the government aid, take the government guidance, and then publish case studies specific to park business so that people can understand what the generic guidance means in terms of their business. And the best guidance has as the case studies of what to do and also what not to do, because there have been quite a few poo traps for small businesses along the way. So we're giving them all these case studies and then we're talking them through them. We did the telephone advice service, we do an email advice service. Like the National Trust, all our projects are on hold and the entire staff, there are only 15 of us, are on the phone day in, day out, talking to members and taking their emails. And we're keeping up.
And what's the impact on people who have permanent pitches? I mean, the site owners staying in contact with them, but also, I mean, what's the financial impact of those people not being able to use their sites?
Are we talking about the caravan owners, the consumers?
Yeah.
Well, most of those will have a license agreement where they pay a pitch fee to site their caravan on the park and to have it connected to the utility system. So they will have paid their pitch fee. What we've had is a minority of caravan owners have asked for a refund. We took a lot of legal guidance on this before we published guidance to the industry. And actually the legals are very straightforward because it's a license agreement to site your caravan because you still have the service being provided. There is no entitlement to a refund. But we advised the membership to engage with their customers because they're hurting too. Some have lost their jobs. They're in difficulty because the business needs goodwill. If you buy a holiday caravan, you will probably buy it with a license agreement for 10, 15, 20 years. It's a long-term relationship. It's like a marriage. Both sides need to get on with one another. So we advised them to communicate openly and early. We even gave them model wordings, a pick and mix of different friendly sentences to use. But we actually said, talk to them because talking to people is so much better than in writing. Don't know if you've noticed, but people have lost the ability to read. I've been doing all my submissions as videos because they're getting across better that way. But some parks have been able to make a token goodwill measure to their customers, which has caused all the other caravan owners to kick off and be terribly upset. They're commended to do it. We've actually advised the industry not to make any decision yet on anything that they could do for goodwill, because we don't know if there's going to be a second wave. We don't know when they're going to be open. And the biggest message we're trying to get across is that caravan owner shares the same interest as the park owner for that business to survive, because they all lose out if the business fails. And I mentioned earlier, we're very worried for the winter that is coming, the third winter that is coming in 12 months.
But is there a problem coming down the road then in terms of people wanting to be compensated for this period that the park owners are going to face?
We've had consumer champions trying to champion it, but most of them, once I've talked them through the issues, have seen that actually this isn't a consumer champion issue. So somebody can try it in court, but if you were going for damages for your loss of use, a court would probably want to value that on the cost of the holiday you would have taken instead in 2020. Well, you tell me what holiday you could have taken in 2020 instead. It's a non-starter. So it's about goodwill and relationships going forwards. The other thing, email after email, even the press, the park owner, all they do is cut the grass. Well, I hope I've explained earlier about that infrastructure and how they do a damn sight more than cutting grass.
And can I just ask you, you mentioned earlier on about people being taken on a vigilante role and asking questions about people being present on sites. But there are some people who would be homeless if they were forced off of some of these, who have permanent pitches on these sites. What's been the situation there?
Well, the closing down of the industry was absolutely fascinating. Do you remember the weekend of 21-22 March? It was like a summer's day. And the A55 from Manchester, Liverpool into North Wales turned into a car park. And there were traffic jams or people jams on Snowdon. And there was a lot of great unhappiness in North Wales, because you do have this town and country thing. And of course, the virus will be in the towns where more people are, and the country people don't want the virus. It was actually the Secretary of State for Wales who contacted me on the Saturday and said, Rolls, you need to close down your industry. And that was an interesting conversation. And on Sunday, we emailed out to the industry and asked them to close. We'd already emailed them 10 days previously, telling them it was coming and to prepare. And I have to say that most of them did close. But we then had to contact, and this is where I love devolution, 4 different governments who were regulating for the closure of our industry. And I actually, which is very naughty with devolution, I formed an email group and I emailed all 4 civil servants and all 4 governments at the same time, because there was only one of me at the time, pointing out the different categories of people who shouldn't be made homeless if the park was closed. And you mentioned the flooding earlier. If your house flooded and you had the builders in, and you owned a holiday caravan, where would you have been living in March 2020? Or if your main place of residence, and surprise me how many there were, is in Spain, you would have flown back as soon as you could because Spain kicked you out. And if your only accommodation in the UK is in your holiday caravan, where would you have gone? And there are actually about 14 categories in the end of people who were on holiday parks who should not be made homeless by the legislation. And devolution being devolution, 4 governments regulated in a slightly different way. 1 or 2 of them have done it twice, which meant we then had to pump the guidance back out to the industry, telling them exactly what it meant. But we had to give, for example, the onus is all on the park owner. So if there's anybody remaining, the park owner needs to have documented why they are there. And I'll be writing a book of the excuses that we have collated as to why people needed to be there. And a lot of customers, even with a home in town, wanted to stay in their holiday caravan, because if you were going to be furloughed and isolated, would you rather be furloughed and isolated in a beautiful park in the countryside, or would you rather go back home to the town? So those were some difficult conversations for park owners, I'm afraid, but they've stepped up. And as I said, as the holiday makers departed, we've been welcoming in the NHS and key workers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Quite a complicated situation you face. If as we move forward through the summer then and restrictions are lifted, I would think holiday parks are going to be inundated with people actually wanting to go there and stay there. That'll be one of the first kinds of areas that people would think of going to. And you've talked about advice and rewriting advice and putting up guidance for approval and so on. How practically are your members going to make sites safe for people to use? And I'm not talking about necessarily the clubhouses and things like that, because they're a separate thing, but actually physically using the sites. How are you going to make that safe?
Well, as I say, we've done an awful lot of work on this. So some people were talking about painting white lines on the grass in order to show your 2-meter spacing distance. But Professor David Bellamy was our president until his death late last year. And he likes us to have wildlife corridors. So the idea is that we don't mow the grass for 2-meter strips. We develop a wildlife corridor, and then we've got the visual 2-meter distancing to help our customers stay apart. On our holiday units, and remember on our holiday units, it's not just holiday caravans. We've got the safari tents and the tree houses and the hobbit houses and the camping pods, and I could go on because glamping is amazing, shepherd's huts, etc., etc. It's about the cleaning. So government actually published a lot of guidance for cleaning. I think it was in non-clinical sex environments, even before with the close down, telling us how to do it. And we're working that up into good guidance. But the one we've learnt relatively recently, which filled me with joy, it goes back to, I think we've called ourselves, we are called fresh air hotels because we are outdoor holidays. But ventilation before your cleaner goes in makes the most enormous difference. So we're looking at procedures whereby we ask our customers to leave the windows open when they check out, so that the whole area has been the complete opposite of what we used to do with security, so that the whole area has been ventilated, because the one thing this virus doesn't like is fresh air and sunlight. So we're going to try and get as much in as we possibly can. Cleaners trained up to go in and do the necessary cleaning to give everybody the confidence that they need.
And would a staggered approach to reopening help?
Yes. Yes, it would help with our local communities, getting them used to holidaymakers coming back. It would help with us, with our training our staff and getting everything in place. That's why private owners of holiday accommodation, holiday caravans, are the most obvious and the easiest, because actually they've been turning up all last week and we've been turning them away, but they've got the key to their own door. Holidaymakers would probably come next, or possibly at the same time, because it is the same issue. There's a lot of talk about peaks in August. A tourism bed night is the most perishable product there is. Once that time has passed, we can't sell that product again and we can never get the money again. So we only have so many tourist bed nights in August. We can't grow the number of nights and we can't grow the amount of accommodation. So there aren't going to be, if there is this rush, which I don't think there will be because of consumer confidence, but there is a limit on how many nights there are and there's a limit on how many tourist beds there are. So it's limited by design. That's the way it works. And with other businesses that have been gone to the wall, as Samantha said, there's probably less than there used to be, and consumer confidence. So yes, staging it would work. Interestingly, Wales has got devolution again. In England, we have steps 1, 2, 3. In Wales, we have traffic lights, red, amber, green. And Wales has said at amber, so step 2, that would be June in England, that accommodation without shared facilities will be allowed to open. So they've already seen the difference between a nightclub and a holiday park, and they've put the nightclub in their green and the holiday park in their amber.